For the fabric of the skirt, I used 100% high-quality cotton. Now let me explain the sequins. For the front and back pieces, if you prefer to separate them, connecting and sew the shoulders together, that's fine too. You can do it according to your own preference. Because I use the same fabric for both the lining and the outer fabric, it consists of 4 pieces. The 2 pieces on the left are the lining, and the 2 pieces on the right are the outer fabric. If you're worried that when cutting, close to the skin will show left to right, it's best to use white for the collar decorative strip. It's also made to be reversible. I have 2 pieces of fabric that I'll sew together and then trim later. Next is the lace part of the collar. Some patterns require leaving 7 millimeters, while others require 5 millimeters. This style mainly pertains to the positioning of the 2 long edges. Following your drawing, cut according to the specified dimensions. Next is the cuff section, which consists of 4 pieces in total. Since I'm using a relatively thin fabric, I've lightly pressed it. This means that after finishing, the cuffs will have a more precise shape. The seam allowance is a standard 5 millimeters, and there are 2 sleeves. For the sleeves, please note that we will mark the lines and points on the front side of the fabric. Leave a 1 centimeter seam allowance at the bottom edge of the sleeves, while the rest should be a standard 5 millimeters. First, trace this entire fabric piece. We will cut along the line at the top, the lowest point, and mark the point at this position as well. Then we will sequentially connect the upper and lower marking points. Once everything is drawn, it appears as shown, and there is also the decorative mesh portion at the cuff. We will cut this mesh part directly according to the dimensions provided in the drawing, and no additional seams are necessary. Cut out 2 identical pieces. We're using this mesh fabric here. Now let's take a look at the lower half draw with the mesh pattern. You can place another piece of paper underneath to improve the grip. Place our pattern on the top layer, the mesh in the middle, and then trace along the edges. Once traced, we can cut along the lines directly without any extra stitching. After cutting, it looks like this. We need 2 of this part. Next is the skirt section. Note that our skirt is quite large, so it needs to be assembled. For each size, I have provided a thumbnail for reference. I divided it into several sections, and the paper provided is half the size. We draw by flipping the paper side to side. The paper I am using now is divided into 8 sections. Check your thumbnail. How many parts does it have? Just assemble it based on those parts.
Each size split has different components. However, this thumbnail is just a rough sketch of how the parts are put together, not a precise scale down of the large image. So if some of you notice that the shape seems a bit off, don't worry too much. This thumbnail is only for reference on how it's divided into parts.
What truly counts is how the design appears when we assemble it ourselves. That's how it will look.
Let me show you a standard skirt pattern. It's assembled like this, with tape applied at the back.
After we finish assembling this half on the left, we'll flip it over.
Then this position is connected, while the bottom one is not. Please note that the connection is only at the top.
The finished skirt hem is quite large. We usually leave a 5 millimeters seam allowance. When we flip it over to paint, this line is the one at the bottom. We need to mark its position for easier comparison with the center of the upper half later. Finally, this is the edge of the bottom skirt hem, which needs to be particularly long. If you want to make a double line draw, I think it's impossible. Here, we directly use folded corners. If you don't have this type of corner or prefer not to buy it, you might consider purchasing ready-made fabric and join
a few pieces together before folding.
If you're using fabric too, you can tear it open like I do. Drawing lines one by one is too tiring. Just tear it directly. Now let me explain how to tear the fabric.
First, examine the texture of your fabric. This direction has a tree-like pattern. If you can't see the texture and your fabric has edges, it means the sides here are the edges with needle holes.
Next, we tear the fabric horizontally like this. When tearing, we make a small cut at the edge and then pull it open firmly. But there is one issue to note. When we make the first tear, the width of the fabric on both ends may not be consistent. One side could be very wide, while the other is very narrow.
Because the fabric we used before was not cut very accurately along the line.
So basically, if you haven't torn this fabric before, the first tear won't work. We need to tear it a second time. The second time, we will cut this small slit according to the size we need. For example, if the drawing specifies 5 centimeters, then you need to tear 6 centimeters, as there are 5 millimeters for the seams on both sides. If the measurement provided is 7 centimeters, then you should adjust it to 8 centimeters. Just remember to add 1 centimeter. Here we will work on the lower part of the sleeve. Because I used this sheer mesh, I worry it might be hard for everyone to see clearly. So I'll just place this drawing on top and explain the position. Sew our edge tape directly along the bottom edge all the way to this point. Note that we are sewing on the front side of the mesh fabric. When sewing, the position of the left edge tape should perfectly align with the edge of the fabric below. If the edge tape above has a front and back, it should be facing upward. Then for this eyelash edge tape, I bought the finished product from Daha Oje. If the edge tape you purchased is not gathered, you will need to gather it yourself.
After the edge of the painting is supported, we turn it over to the back. This is about 3 millimeters to the right of the stitching position we just sewed. The excess mesh can be trimmed off.
Be careful when trimming. Do not cut through the edge of the painting. Now we pull at this position on the inner circle. We will create a double line gather here. Since we didn't mark this with a red line, we are pulling in about 3 millimeters and at about 7 millimeters edge inward. We will create a gather line on each side. After the gather lines are completed, we pull in the two bottom lines at the same time to pull out the size after gathering at this position matches the size of this cuff. Note that this part of the cuff consists of two pieces. If they are made of the same fabric, you can choose either piece and sew them right sides together. If the two pieces of fabric are different, sew the right side of one with the right side of this section. This refers to the fabric piece that faces outward after finishing the sleeves. After sewing, check for any issues. Remove the gathering thread and sew the two cuff pieces together with the right sides facing. Just sew along the line we just stitched, sandwiching the lower part of the mesh fabric in between. Once sewn, we'll flip this part of the cuff to the front, scrape the seam with your nails, or you can press it with an iron. Both sides are the same. Next, we will sew along the bottom edge of the cuff all the way to the visible line on the front. This piece of cuff fabric on top will be our final result. This is the piece of fabric facing outward. After sewing, it looks like this. Then we'll treat this part of the other sleeve in this. Let's examine the sleeve section. The seam allowance at the bottom edge of the sleeve is 1 centimeter.
Every seam on the sleeve needs to be pleated, and we must backstitch at the start and end of the pleats. Let me show you with a piece of fabric. If we backstitch at the seam's edge, the fabric can easily become tightened and misshapen, leaving 5 millimeters of fabric at the bottom edge is too close to the distortion point, which may cause the seam to be slightly uneven. I left a 1 centimeter seam allowance here. When sewing from top to bottom, I didn't backstitch at the bottom edge because the seam allowance is wide. Unless you intentionally rip it, the lack of backstitching shouldn't be an issue. This position is actually not easy to unravel because it is quite far from the style line. Anyway, when we sew the cuffs later, we just need to align the style lines correctly. We can trim this extra style after sewing. Personally, I think it's better to leave a bit more, but if you're confident with your technique, leaving 5 millimeters is enough. Next, we will fold the straight lines of both sleeves in order. The side facing up is the right side of the fabric, while the side facing down is the wrong side. Each line needs to be folded. This is how it looks. Now we have these two sleeves. The one on the right is our right sleeve, and the one on the left is our left sleeve. We should note that the direction of the folds after measuring and folding the right sleeve, all the folds should face right. After measuring and folding the left sleeve, all the folds should face left. Due to the direction issue, when sewing, you should pay attention to the front and back of the stitch direction. For instance, I'm currently sewing the right sleeve, and it should all be directed to the right. When we fold this straight line, we need to sew in this direction
and the starting point also needs to be backstitched. Sewing should be done 1 millimeter away from the fabric edge. After sewing the marked line, the thread ends at the starting position should be trimmed neatly.
Next, we unfold both sides of the sleeve and fold this pleat to the right. Since it's sewn according to the direction I just mentioned, this stitch now faces upwards.
This is the front side, and the stitch looks better on this side. Since I used a hot pen, I didn't iron it. Otherwise, it could easily scorch. If you're using a hot pen, just scrape it with your fingernail. If you're using a water pen, you can iron it. For the hot pen, I do the final ironing after the right folds are completed. Just fold each line's position slightly, then stitch 1 millimeter in along the edge, all facing to the right. Now regarding the left sleeve, I fold it like this and stitch on this side. After sewing, the thread ends need to be trimmed cleanly. Once trimmed, unfold the fabric and fold this pleat to the left. This way, the side facing up will be the front. Next, we will sew the second and third pleats in the same manner, ensuring that all the pleats are sewn properly. We also need to pay attention to one issue, which is that the spacing between each pleat will be relatively narrow, if at this point.
When you need to tilt this fold in that direction, and you feel that the space is narrower, you can choose not to tilt it just yet.
We can finish all the sewing first, and you can tilt it later since this fold is movable. You can choose the most convenient direction to tilt it for sewing the next fold. You can tilt it in any direction first, and then adjust this fold in the same direction later. After all the folds are done, we'll measure the gathering line on each side of this style line, 2 meters apart, creating 2 gathering lines in total. The stitch spacing I used is 3. Do not backstitch additionally, when sewing this gathering line, check the direction of the pleats above and sew the gathering line in that same direction. Otherwise, if you sew against the direction of the pleat, it's easy to disrupt it. For example, the bottom edge of the gathered line I'm sewing now is facing my right side. The pleats on top are aligned downward in the direction of our sewing. So when we sew, the pleats will fall nicely. Now, we will sew the other sleeve, positioning its bottom edge towards the left side so that when we sew this gathered line, the pleats will still fall downward.
After sewing the gathered line, we tighten both bottom threads while paying attention to the gathered area. We mainly focus on the unstitched sections on both sides of the pleats.
However, we can make slight adjustments to the middle part, which has the pleats.
We tighten the pleats so that each one connects to the next, leaving no gaps in between.
Sometimes, if some of you don't have the right equipment, the middle may not look neat. So, while gathering the pleats, we can also make minor adjustments to the middle. By using this gathering line, the middle section will appear neater. However, It's important to note that you shouldn't pull the middle part too tightly, as this will cause the pleats to overlap and deform.
This is how I've handled it, and the dimensions here must match those of the cuff.
Here we place the upper part of the sleeve with the wrong side facing up on the table. Then we align the right side of this piece of fabric from the cuff that faces inward with it. Note that this is not the outer fabric of the cuff. It is this piece of fabric from the cuff that faces
Sew along
inward.
the top
and bottom with a straight
Confirm
stitch.
if there are any issues.
If there are no issues, then remove the gathering thread from the bottom edge of the sleeve.
Then we will unfold the area we just stitched.
Smooth out the stitched area with your nails or press it with an iron. Note that the side facing up in the video is the inside of the sleeve.
Now let's flip it to the front.
For the design of the cuff on the front, we will fold it inward to the back.
The crease position after folding perfectly covers the seam where the cuff joins the bottom edge of the upper part.
Then after covering this position, we will directly draw a line on the front. Secure this position.
This is the result after processing.
Then we adjust the line a bit in this section. The double lines are also being adjusted. Sew 2 millimeters from the left and right sides of this design. The distance of the line pulled here is 3 millimeters. Do not backstitch at the front. The thread ends a little longer. Then we pull both bottom threads tight at the same time. Pull this fold out.
The size after properly pulling the fold will match the armhole size of the front and back pieces.
You can compare it yourself.
This part of the fold has a small fold amount.
It's just a delicate little fold. Next, let's work on the decoration of the mesh part at the cuff. Cut the mesh directly according to the dimensions given. There's no need to sew it anymore.
First, fold the mesh over.
Then take this half that is closer to us. First, let's fold it down a bit like this. Then fold it up a bit, fold it down a bit more.
It's about the feeling of pinching a bow. The other half is the same operation.
When we fold at this position, it's mainly about holding the central position.
Then we take out a longer ribbon, tie a loose knot to secure the central part.
If you prefer, you can tie a tight knot. Actually, it's also possible. In other words, as long as it's a bit more aesthetic knot here,
I'll sew it onto this sleeve with a needle and thread later.
The ribbon I'm using is 4 millimeters wide. Then the length can initially be a bit longer. Wait a moment. You may have a different opinion. It looks better either a bit longer or a bit shorter. Then trim it again.
Just tidy it up a little. This is how the front looks. Then we will fold the cuff position. Locate the center point and mark it. Then we will sew on both sides at the marked center point. Make another mark in the center.
It inaccurately marks its own position. You can use a ruler to measure the distance, then divide it by 2.
First, tie the ribbon at the center of the mesh. Directly hand sew it to the marked center point of this cuff. I made a small mistake while sewing here.
However, this doesn't require much skill. You just need to sew it securely once the middle position is secured.
We will focus on the edges of the mesh part.
Additionally, fold it along the middle position. At the point where the stitching is about 2 to 3 millimeters to the right. Sew a few stitches to secure it.
Once secured, it looks like this. Then we take the excess mesh fabric from the sleeve hem. Trim it off.
Then secure the other side in the same way. Once both sides are done, it looks like this.
Now let's take a look.
There are 2 marked points underneath as well, the positions of these 2 markers. We need to secure it with a ribbon. We will insert the needle from the back of this sleeve. Pull the needle out from the marker point.
Then the ribbon wraps around this tool section. Fix it in this position.
After processing, the front will look like this. We can just sew it ourselves at the back.
The other side is done the same way.
Take note of the position of the center point from earlier.
I hand-stitched it with that sewing thread.
Only the sides are made with ribbon. After both marked points have been properly prepared, this is how it looks. Then we will use the same method. Make sure to take care of the other sleeve. Here we will handle this part of the collar decoration strip. In my drawing, to make it easier to distinguish,
I drew a red marking point on one of its edges.
We are now going to sew the edge with the marking point.
When we sew this edge,
the starting and ending positions both have a 5 millimeter seam allowance outward.
Then when we sew here,
the 2 identical pieces of fabric are facing each other.
After sewing, trim the excess seam allowance.
This means the areas that are left we typically leave a 5 millimeters there are sewing points. We use pinking shears to trim this. If there are no pinking shears, then you can make cuts in the curved areas.
Then we will flip this part over and iron it smooth. If you're using a hot pen, we should try to avoid ironing the seam area.
Otherwise, the seam position will be gone.
Just iron the stitched fold flat.
This is how it looks after it has been properly handled. The other one is handled in the same way. Here we take a look at this part of the linku lace. Some styles of this lace are 7 millimeters. Some sizes are 5 millimeters. The size I have now is a 7 millimeter style, according to the dimensions given in the drawing. Then the long sides on both ends. We add a 7 millimeter style and cut it off. Then fold it in half and iron it.
This is how it looks now.
It doesn't matter if you leave the style on the short edge or too much impact. Then over here we also create double fold on the left and right sides of this design 2 millimeters on each side, all the way to the fold line. Here I'm using a stitch distance Do not 4. Backstitch back and
Leave
forth.
the
thread tail a bit longer. Then we pull in the 2 bottom threads at the same time.
Pull this fold out.
One side feels a bit tighter. Then switch to pulling the 2 bottom lines on the other side.
After properly folding.
It should match the size at this position. After making the adjustment, first compare this position yourself. Note that we are not comparing approaches to approaches here, but rather this lace on top, the fabric at the very edge of the design. Align it with the style line of the fabric below. Confirm that the size is appropriate. After we align this position correctly,
sew along the design line on our lace.
At this point, the folded position of our lace is to the left. To the right is the opening. Additionally, The starting point of our lace is approximately 7 millimeters. The ending point is approximately 7 millimeters. Please try to avoid otherwise. We may have trouble folding it properly when sewing. This area has folds. So let me remind you once more.
When we sew here, the edge of the fabric above, it aligns with the red fabric line below. It doesn't mean that it matches the one below.
This is how it looks after the car is ready. Please confirm it yourself. If there are no problems, we will go ahead and remove this dashed line.
Additionally, there is the style of the lace here. You can trim it a bit.
Just leave about 2 or 3 millimeters. Pay attention to the design of this lace.
It's not the design of the flat one below. Then take out this part of our decorative strip.
Directly cover it at this position.
At this moment, the decorative strip at the top
and the fabric of the front and back pieces underneath.
The edges are aligned. Then this position on the side where it's folded.
This perfectly covers the one underneath. This is the thread we just used to stitch the lace.
Maintain this position. We will go straight along this folded edge.
Secure it in place. Here, I'm just going in from the edge. The seam measurement is at 1 millimeter. The seam measurement at the lace position.
It's just going to be covered. If some areas are slightly exposed, you can flip it over. Just remove this thread from the lace. After handling it, it looks like this. Then take a look at the design of this decorative strip.
I'll draw this position for everyone again. It will be a bit more noticeable. Feel free to take a look.
The position you have arrived at and the edge of the fabric.
It's just next to our car's stitching line. The position of the edge of this fabric.
Is it exactly parallel?
Then there shouldn't be areas that are too wide. Some places are very narrow. If there is such a phenomenon,
adjust the position of this thread slightly.
Make sure the thickness is as consistent as possible. Then we take out one piece of the lining. The lining and the base fabric. Align the front sides together this way.
From this position, follow this line. Sew to this bottom edge.
When sewing, the top layer is the lining. The layer below is the outer fabric. You should sew on one side, line it on one side. The seam lines on the top and bottom must match. Because if the stitching position is not right, it can easily cause the part below to be... This decorative strip may have inconsistent thickness. This refers to the style line of the fabric. It is based on what we just illustrated. Use the one we drew as the reference.
A crucial step after measuring and stitching.
It is to open up this side. Take a look at this part of the decorative strip. Its thickness is inconsistent from start to finish. Of course, it's quite difficult to claim that it's completely try not to say that some areas are especially some areas thick. Are particularly definitely thin. Won't work if it's too obvious.
If everything is fine,
we can adjust our approach a bit. But if there is a problem, it should be removed promptly.
Reprocess it.
The design here has a curved shape. We use decorative scissors for trimming. The right angle position will trim the design at an angle like this.
Then we flip it over. Turn this lace to the front.
The inside and outside are in an opposite state after properly organizing it.
This part looks like this. Next, we sew along the seam we just created.
from the back to the front. Sew a straight line 1 millimeter from the edge. Make it a bit more even. This is how it looks after sewing the straight line along the edge. Then we use the same method. Also prepare this front and back piece on the right side. Then we attach the sleeves to the outer layer. Pay attention when attaching the sleeves. We need to separate the outer part and the lining only on the upper section. Then this sleeve is split into left and right sides, like the fabric we have at the bottom now. This is the front and back piece on the right side.
Then we need to take out the right sleeve. This detail on the right sleeve, they are all leaning to the right.
Make sure to distinguish it yourself.
Don't mix it up.
Then we need to measure this size at the puller's position. The adjustment matches the position of the sleeve cap. The adjustments are pretty much the same. We can start by comparing it this way. Let's check if they are the same. If everything is confirmed to be fine, we will sew the sleeves together with the underarm sleeve cap. Sew them together with the front sides facing each other. Note that the curvature at these 2 points is different. So we align this seam line and sew it together. Adjust the curvature while sewing. After finishing sewing, make sure there are no problems. We should first remove the front puller. Next, after we finish the sleeves, this is how it looks from the side. Then let's check the armhole position of the sleeve. There is a method for handling the sleeve cap in the tutorial folder. One method employs the other method involves fusing the interfacing, and I am using this interfacing method here. Once processed, it looks like this.
If you want to handle it the same way,
then you are just like me. This step should be taken care of directly. The sleeve on the other side and the sleeve cage. It is also done in the same manner.
Then we will align the side seams of the ceremonial section.
Sew along the edge and the seam line.
Then the side seam of the outer section.
And this side seam of the sleeve. All fronts facing each other. Sew along the perimeter seam.
After measuring accurately,
on the seam at the armpit position, make a few notches on it. Then we will turn the entire sleeve inside out. After turning it inside out, the ceremonial part and the display part are nested together, the front and back pieces on the other side. And the sleeves are also processed in the same way. Then let's take a look. There are several marked points at this position on the drawing. We will mark these points
on this fabric for clarity.
After finishing the drawing, comparing with the other side at the same position. Also, mark this point for it. After drawing, the upper part will be...
Here we will deal with the lace section of the hem stitching. In the first video where the color pieces were explained,
I did mention that this size is especially long if you don't use a folding method. Instead, use a double line gathering method. I believe it's quite challenging to accomplish. After all, this length is a few meters long. Alternatively, you can buy pre-made lace to assemble. Here, the fabric length is not enough.
So I joined several strips of fabric together. When sewing,
we position one side of the 2 fabric strips facing each other. Sew and secure it approximately 5 millimeters in from the fabric edge.
Then we unfold the 2 fabric strips.
Separate the middle section towards both sides. You can either scrape your nails or use an iron to smooth out this area. Once the splicing is complete, we'll continue to splice the 3rd piece in the same way until this length matches what is specified in our drawing. If the sisters are somewhat inexperienced, you can make it slightly longer than the length I provided in the drawing. Because if you use the batter to adjust the angle, it's just impossible to calculate it perfectly.
We'll make the lace a little longer.
Then we can just cut off the excess part. Additionally, we need to pay attention to another issue.
We must ensure their style is consistent.
We shouldn't have styles that contradict each other. Some styles should be aligned on one side. It is essential to sew everything together on the same side first. We will fold it like this and press it a bit. The side that is folded in, that is the back side. This side is the one we designed. The side facing up is the front of the fabric.
After everything is properly heated,
we use the batter to press the angle. Note that this part's folds are not the dense kind. If you prefer it dense, that's also fine. If you like it dense, then you need to make this length a bit longer. Otherwise, this length won't be enough after the position of the needle at the corner. It's 5 millimeters in from the edge of the fabric on the right side. There was originally a stitching line here, but I didn't draw it out because it was just too long. After folding it properly, the edge looks like this. This part is used first. This lace, after finishing the pleats, we will attach it to the hem of the skirt. This is the position where we sew it together.
During the sewing here,
we sew with the front sides facing each other.
Pay attention to where our lace begins and ends.
It's approximately 1.5 centimeters. There should be no creases because the position on both sides has an opening at the back. On this side, I will be making a double fold. It means to fold twice. After folding twice and tucking in the raw edges, then sew to secure. So at the beginning and end, if there are too many folds, it becomes uneven when we fold it.
After folding it well, let's take a final look. This is the length.
There are some allowances for size.
Then we trim off the excess parts,
like these last few remaining ones. There are still quite a few creases on it. We can exert a little more force. Pull this thread to break it. Smooth the fabric out, then just finish removing the remaining part.
Trim off this small excess.
Just wait a moment. This is how we do it here. First, make a fold along the design. Then fold inward like this once more.
Tuck in this raw edge.
Then we turn to the front side. At this position of the skirt hem, when sewing the side, the design underneath is oriented to the left side.
An important step after drawing the main lines
is that we need to adjust the position and give them a fresh ironing.
Steps like this ironing
the overall texture feels entirely
different. Press the
folds. We align the folds along the grain
in this vertical direction.
Press like this. Don't let the folds get distorted. Next, let's take care of this. The location of the openings at the back. First, follow this guideline. Fold it once towards this side. After completing this crease, use an iron to press it flat. Then, 6 to 7 millimeters away from the crease.
Fold it again.
It also needs to be pressed flat. This is the position for the second fold. I didn't draw a line.
But if the sisters are unsure,
you can draw a line for assistance. This way, the folding position will be more standardized. After folding it this way twice, tucking in the raw edges will make it look cleaner. Then we turn it to the front side. The edge should be about 4 to 5 millimeters inward. The crease line will secure this in place. This is how the front looks after creasing it here. The reverse side looks like the opening at the back of the other side. Just repeat the operation yourself. Next, we are at this position, that is, this circle around our waist. Fold it along the crease. This is the distance for the crease. I use 4, do not backstitch.
At this seam line,
2 millimeters on both the left
leave
and
a
right
little
sides. Extra length on the thread on
then we
each side.
simultaneously pull in the 2 base threads.
Pull this fold out. One side feels tighter, then switch to the other side. This extracts the 2 bottom
after
lines.
it has been properly folded.
Organize it a bit for later use. Here, the waistline of the skirt should be sewn to align with the bottom edge of the upper part. But the upper part we have now consists of the left front and back and the right front and back pieces are not connected in the middle.
So when we sew this skirt together,
because a line is drawn in the middle of the skirt. I mentioned at the start of the fabric cutting explanation that this line should sew the skirt and the upper part together. We take this line as a reference. The left and right sides can be stitched with the front and back pieces of the upper part. So after we finish gathering, we should compare this position with the dimensions ourselves. Once we confirm there are no issues, we can sew them together. When sewing, the outer and inner parts are sewn together with the waist seams simultaneously. This waist seam cannot be enclosed by the lining. However, we will carry out edge finishing for this waist seam. For the upper part, align the inner and outer waist seams towards the sides before sewing them together. During the measuring and sewing process, if you notice any pleats are uneven,
after
you can
bringing
adjust
it
them
to the
as you
center, we will attach the front and back piece of the other half to continue sewing.
The middle part of the left and right front and back pieces should not have any gaps. They should fit together perfectly. After measuring, the front will look like this. Then, the top and bottom edges on both sides must be just right. There is a seam position at the back. If you don't want to do an overlocking process, then you can directly use an overlock machine to finish the edges. You create a top stitch at the waist area on the front. But if you want something more delicate instead of overlocking, you just follow me to the next step of this stitching. Before stitching, we can first remove the drawstring from the waist. Here, we will isolate the design at the waistband. Next, we prepare a piece of fabric. This strip of cloth matches the fabric of the garment. The length should be 2 to 3 centimeters longer than the waistband size. Here, I have already folded and ironed. The size when unfolded is 1.4 centimeters. Then, reduce the top and bottom long edges by an additional 5 millimeters. After folding and pressing, this position is approximately 7 millimeters. Then, when we fold it, we fold in the reverse side of the fabric. The side facing up. Here we first unfold this folded strip of cloth. Fold one of the creases towards the back and use an iron to press the folded area flat. When ironing, make sure to only press the folded area. Do not press the crease in the middle as well. If that side is ironed flat, then you will have to iron that crease in that position again. After ironing, we will align the unprocessed seam line with the seam line at our waist. Here, the front sides are at the starting position. We place this strip of fabric 1 centimeter forward. Then we sew along the vertical seam lines.
Be careful with the upper part and the hem while sewing.
At this point, the two sides are facing each other. Here we can simply unpick the stitches along the vertical seam lines.
After unpicking, we can trim the seam allowance to about 4 millimeters. After trimming, we need to flip it to the front to measure the seam.
When measuring the seam, note how this fabric strip unfolds on the back. Here we measure the seam at the bottom edge of the upper section. When measuring the seam, the fabric at the bottom faces to the left. After completing the waist seam, we flip it back to the back looks side. Like this, while the front looks like this. The marking line has been removed. Slightly trim the excess on both sides of the waistband fabric strip. Just leave a 5 millimeter allowance.
Leave 5 millimeters more than the back opening. Then we will fold back the extra 5 millimeters. Then fold down this position at the top. Here, we need to properly cover the waistline.
The same method applies to the position on the other side. Finally, we will use the long needle technique to sew and secure this position.
In this long stitch method, we simply pull a bit of fabric at the crease of this strip. Then we pull a bit of fabric at the seam of the waistband and skirt hem. Keep sewing forward slowly like this. After finishing each section, you can tighten the thread a bit. This step is repetitive.
In other words, we can wrap up the entire length of this style's position. Sisters who don't know how to do this long stitch can also check the tutorial folder for a separate video. This is what it looks like after I finished hand stitching this part. Lastly, we will sew a concealed button at the back ourselves. Then we just need to add the bead decoration to the front chest. Here we will add decoration with beads on the front chest. Here I'm using this type of small millet. The thread is simply regular sewing thread. The needle and thread enter through the inner fabric sleeve area. Then it emerges between the two layers of fabric. Hide the thread end in the middle of the two layers of fabric. The part that comes out is the front and back pieces. This marking point at the bottom here. Note that I am in the middle of the two layers of fabric. The position of this seam is what comes out.
Then we directly thread a tiny bead in.
Note that this bead is quite small, so your needle also needs to be quite fine. Otherwise, it won't go through.
We start from the same marked point on the opposite side.
This seam between the two layers of fabric is where the stitches come out like this.
I didn't speed up here.
Everyone, take a look at this spot. This is where we aim for stitches each time.
It's always in this spot. Next, we'll tie a knot at this position.
It's just a simple slip knot.
This knot is tied on the right side of the bead. Just make sure not to wrap the bead into it. After tying the knot, pull it tight here. The thread in the middle is quite tight.
You can't be loose and weak.
Then we sew towards this upward mark on the left.
Sew into the seam between the 2 layers of fabric. Then it comes out like this at the top.
After coming out, we also tie a knot here, regarding the position where we tie the knot.
This knot is located at the edge of this marked point. After tying the knot, we thread another bead.
Then we repeat the process following the first bead. Sew into the seam below this marker point again.
Then emerge from the marker point above.
Then tie another knot. The next steps are all repetitive.
Everyone can try this on their own.
Until we locate several markers.
We have successfully threaded and knotted all the beads. I have finished sewing several beads now.
Then we take the thread and needle through the seam of the 2 layers of fabric next to it.
Just put it back directly between the 2 layers of fabric. The thread end can just be hidden between these 2 layers of fabric.
After processing, the front side looks like this.
This subtitle,
the final ironing of this skirt. Sisters who have specific, you definitely need to use this garment. You don't necessarily have to buy one made just, you can simply use the regular garment steamer you have. They can actually all be used. I don't recommend this one that I have because it is leaking. There's another option. In other words, if you really don't have this type, if you also don't want, you can spray some water, then gently pull down this fold like this. Wait for it to dry naturally. This crease will also be a bit more orderly. Many women feel that after I finished it, why is this pleat? It feels like it's less neat than others. The final ironing step is very important. Everyone can also take a look at the video. In the end, I finished iron. It's completely different from how it looked at the very beginning. It feels completely different. Everyone should try not to cut corners in this step. You need to iron the front, back. I will give everyone a brief demonstration. This is an ironing technique. Also, this steam is very hot. When you all use this iron, be sure to pay attention. Don't burn yourself. You can also use tweezers or something to adjust the hem. I tend to be a bit careless myself. I directly used my hand with this glove to handle the hot item. Additionally, once we put on the slip under, we can make a slight adjustment to the skirt. Let's organize it again. If you prefer the skirt, there are still some fairly natural creases. In that case, you can choose not to deal with it. If it's my own finished, it requires some handling by someone who is. For smaller sizes, it's advisable to organize them because with larger sizes, the hem, because it's relatively low, its curvature will be more natural. But the skirt of the smaller size is narrower. It's relatively shorter. Compared to the larger size, it is less natural. It would look better if you tidy it up a bit more later.